Welcome, everybody, to Bacon and Coffee. I'm glad you guys could join us today. Waiting on my guest, Mike Verret. But in the meantime, let's start with a 30-second countdown. All right, and we're going to start with our digital caffeine. Here we go. All right, Mike, welcome, my man. How are you today?
Brian, I am fantastic. I'm a little bit behind, so my apologies for the delay, but it's good to see you. How are you?
You made it right under the wire. So talk about hitting it on the nose. It's all good. It's all good. So, anyways, we are here today to talk about branding and the kind of stuff that you do. So, let's open it up. The first question I've got for you is, let people know who you are, what you do, where you've been, give a little background.
Sure. My name is Mike Verret, and my business is called Verret Associates. I show businesses how to talk about themselves. The hardest thing in the world for a business to do is to understand their audience from the audience's perspective and understand what's important to them to make a connection with them. And that's never more important than today with the internet when people just Google for what they're looking for. So what I do is give businesses their audience's perspective of their message and what's connecting to or trying to connect to their audience, show them how to clarify it, and show them how to make sure they're connected with their audience from the very start on the audience's terms, and then they read and receive information in the order and the timing that they need to. So a great example of that is a resume. Everybody's written a resume before, and the reality is you send in your resume, you spend a lot of time on where you've been, what you've done, what you've accomplished, accolades. But the reality is that employer is looking at resumes 7 to 9 seconds on average, and that's it. So when that happens, all they're seeing is the first sentence at the top of your resume. And if they don't connect to what they see and read, they don't read further to where you spent all your time. That becomes incredibly important with your business message. And your one thing that you become known for and people remember you for really is your message strategy, and how you send it out there into the world becomes just vessels to carry that across the water. So that's where I focus. And I have a 24-year background in advertising marketing, a lot of time with agencies, and 6 years with Hasbro Toys and Games on the global brand team. But through all of that, what I took away was I understand an audience and how they think about a message. And if I can connect a business with their audience more effectively simply by showing them how to talk to them on their terms and get their attention in the right way, then that business is going to see more success.
Excellent. So I've been listening, just in prepping for this, I've been listening to a masterclass by, God, what's the guy's name? Let's see here. His name is Bob Iger, and he is the CEO of Disney. And he talked a lot about how when he came in, they were having problems with animation. They weren't doing good in their animation. A lot of their stuff was old. And then how they kind of assimilated other companies like 21st Century Fox, Marvel brands, Pixar, those kind of things, and brought those in. So from the brand essence side of things, I mean, he talks a lot about brand and the concern of, bringing in an acquisition into those companies and having them match up with Disney, because they have so many different facets that they do. And I think that's one of the things about a brand that we've got to think about is, when you're talking about something like Disney, we think of, the princesses, theme parks, movies, those kind of things. How is that different for small to mid-sized businesses? I mean, not that we're going to be acquiring, other companies, but, how can we learn lessons about, assimilating brands, getting it out there and talking to other people? What does that mean?
Well, I think Disney is a great example where they started as an entertainment empire and they have looked at that as their guiding light. But the market has changed so much that Disney has found incredible growth in the consumer products area.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see for Disney is actually a combination of things where they're looking for the right entertainment partnerships or acquisitions, but they're also looking at how they grow their business beyond the screen. So
Right.
beyond just the content, what does that look like? And obviously forever there's been role play, there's been dress up and costumes that are related to the Disney universe. But Disney has made some incredible shifts in what they're acquiring. For instance, Marvel is a great example of that, where they saw the acceleration of entertainment meets play pattern. And now they're in the business of not just creating films or making movies, but also the toys that go with that. They're
Mm-hmm.
beginning to create that business on their own instead of just licensing. When it comes to a small business, focus is key. So Disney didn't just jump into the toy business. Disney built an incredible content machine and then were able to propagate that message into consumer products, CPG. For a small business, it's all about the accuracy of that partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So if you sell hot dogs, a good partnership is going to be a bun maker. That makes a lot
Mm-hmm.
of sense, and a small business is going to look at that. If you sell hot dogs, a movie studio isn't going to make a lot of sense. It's a question of which direction you want to grow and can you stay true to that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a business, Hasbro is a great example. I saw this firsthand where they make toys, plastic items on the shelf at Walmart, Target. That's their business. And toys are not a frequency purchase or a luxury purchase. They're not expensive and you don't buy them all the time. But what really does drive it is entertainment. And Hasbro saw that as well, but they were coming from the other side of that chasm where Disney was on the entertainment first side and they had all the films. Hasbro was on the toy first side, they have all the shelves. Hasbro was trying to bridge that gap by creating entertainment related to their brands on their own. And one of the biggest opportunities that they saw and biggest successes that they saw was with Transformers in 2007 when the Michael Bay franchise launched. They saw that as a huge stepping stone into Hollywood. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing, they can go out and form partnerships with broadcasters or content creators. They could have their own network, which they did for a while, called The Hub on Discovery Kids. They look at all of these ways to go to expand into that entertainment and content based side of the business. But when it doesn't stick or if the partnership's bad, they're right back to plastic on the shelf at Walmart. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the key is you could make all these different moves to say, I want to be in entertainment. I want to be in consumer packaged goods. I want to be in technology. I want to be in video game consoles. But running out and making those partnerships just to have them and say that's the direction that I'm going isn't always right. So the small to mid-sized businesses have to take that into consideration and make smart decisions. You can't just outspend or put a ton of money against something like a big company could do to make it successful. You have to make smart decisions. So take
Mm-hmm.
that all the way back to your messaging. If your message doesn't align with the direction that one of these acquisitions or partnerships is going, that should cause you to pause, take a step back and think, all right, is this aligned correctly? And if your message is clear, that's something that you should be able to evaluate and identify very quickly that they're not
Mm-hmm.
on the same page. What happens is if it's too cluttered, if you have too many things going on, then all of a sudden everything looks right. Oh, we're doing this, that person's doing this. We're doing this, that person's doing this. And that just creates a network of confusion. It clutters your message and you're not going to get the traction that you want.
Right. So let's go back to the basics. And a lot of people think that brand is logos. That brand is, the tagline, just do it. There's a lot more to this. And it goes, I think it goes back to the basics of psychology is, when we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about these things, what comes first? Is it the persona and the person that we're selling to, or is it the image that we want to portray, or is it both, or what's the mix? How does that work when somebody's coming up with their brand, enhancing their brand, changing their brand? Where did they start?
So that's a great question. And I look at brand as first of all, to set the level for how I look at brands and what kind of or absolute lack of control they have over their message now. If you go back to the 90s and think about Nike, and just do it was the paramount, that was their message. And everybody adopted that. But you look at other sneaker companies, like Adidas, for instance, they have much more of a team approach to what their imagery and their brand persona is, whereas Nike is about individual accomplishment. Then
Mm-hmm.
onto the scene, you have Under Armour. And all of a sudden, Under Armour is saying, this is our house. They're the ones who are coming in and shaking up the party for people like Adidas and Nike. What it boils down to for brand is, how do I identify among the competition?
Mm-hmm.
If Nike is just do it, they're doing that to make sure that they aren't Adidas, that they don't come across as Under Armour or Puma or New Balance. Everybody has their own personality, let's call it. That's sort of what your brand message or what you stand for represents. But think about what Amazon has done to this whole thing. Amazon has introduced, for years now, the idea of customer reviews and ratings. So
Mm-hmm.
now the consumers can talk directly to each other about a product. If they like it, if they don't like it, what it looked like when it got to them. All of the sudden, that I just do it doesn't mean as much to me. Because am I just going to do it? I'm just going to ask these 2,000 people who bought the same thing that I'm looking at and get the real story. So brand now really is about personality. It's about
Mm-hmm.
how does your personality resonate with your audience? And brands are having a harder and harder time doing that. And from my perspective, my humble, I sit in my basement in Rhode Island, but from my point of view, what they're running into is they don't know what to say or
Mm-hmm.
do to talk to their audience, because their audience has 100% control of what they want to hear. And more importantly, it's no longer 3 TV channels and 5 radio channels and 2 newspapers that you just throw
Mm-hmm.
it in there and say, you need what we have. Now it's they can order stuff from anywhere they want and have it delivered to them. So how does a brand battle that? The
Right.
easiest thing for them to do is start paying attention to today's consumer, and the fact that today's consumer can answer all these questions for themselves. They don't need the
Right.
brand to tell them to just do it, or this is our house.
Well, and I think one of the things about what you just said too, which we need to bring up, is there's a big difference between, small business branding and large business branding, because we deal with much more niched areas. We know, back to the original question of persona and people, we should know who our avatar is. We should know what keeps them up at night, what their problems are, how they make their decisions, what's important to them, what's not important to them. It's much easier from a small business, whether you're dealing at a local bagel shop or you're dealing with even a national, marketing agency like you and me do. You're doing branding.
Mm-hmm,
I'm doing, online marketing for B2B businesses. I've
mm-hmm,
identified that niche and gotten in there. I think the bigger companies, they have to deal with, global issues. What does their brand say in India? What does their brand say in, Malaysia? Those kind of things. So, they're looking at different cultures and how to expand that around, or we're trying to focus in on, that perfect persona. So from a
yeah.
brand standpoint, how do you identify that persona better? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of it comes back to that avatar and who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, if you want to meet someone new, you're going to think about how they communicate and how they receive information. You're not just going to come in and bully your way through it. Think of a bad date and what that looks like. If somebody's thinking about themselves the entire time, the other person just loses interest in that date. They're not, okay, enough about you, or that's
Right.
great, but meet me halfway there. And I think a lot of brands need to understand, what brands need to focus on is that meeting halfway piece. I'm going to use coronavirus, okay? The COVID
Okay.
pandemic, when it hit,
How about Corona
I'm
beer?
thinking about or Corona beer. We could get to that next. But so the COVID pandemic did something interesting. It put everybody in the exact same bucket on the same day of, March 14th or 13th of 2020. And that actually paralyzed business from a messaging standpoint, because what the hell do they do now? If
Right.
you looked if I look at what small businesses were doing, it was, we're going to muddle through, we're going to power through, we're going to give our people what they want. And in some cases, I saw that being delivery versus curbside pickup. Something as simple as this, okay? Delivery was spiking. So for a company that I worked with, their delivery was going through the roof because nobody wanted to leave their house. But the other thing that the COVID pandemic launched was curbside pickup. So this business had an amazing delivery service, and they were trying to increase their radius by 2 miles, and that was it. What it took was a quick discussion to understand that people don't even care about delivery anymore. They just don't want to go into the building. So if they could pull up in front of your store or your establishment and grab what they need off the shelf outside and hop back in the car, you no longer need to increase your radius 2 miles. You don't even need to hire more delivery drivers, because now people can order online from you, pick up at their leisure, and go on with their day without coming into contact with another person. Very practical, very simple answer that for something that people were already accustomed to doing now, just because of the COVID pandemic and what it created. So the shopper behavior changed. That was the insight there and what we looked at. But now let's apply it to a big company like Verizon or AT&T or Coca-Cola. Their first reaction when the pandemic hit, every single advertiser shifted to, we're here with you, we're here for you. We understand what you're going through. Not one big company differed from that. Not one. Every single one of them was trying to get used to the idea of, oh shit, our business just fundamentally changed because of a global pandemic. What do we say to our audience? We'll try to put them at ease. Instead of functionally talking to them about how they can continue to get the service and the same experience, they focused on, we're here for you. But what that really was how are we going to figure this out? We need to make an announcement. Then we need to come back and figure out how we're going to market to them in this new world. And so many businesses who were planning for 2021 still hadn't been able to figure out what they were doing, because in April, they were trying to figure out if masks and everything were still a mandate. Look at how the advertising shifted. Everybody's social distancing. AT&T is putting out a disclaimer at the bottom of their ads. This ad was shot with social distancing. They are paralyzed by it. So small businesses have the advantage of a nimble. They don't have to try and steer the Titanic around an iceberg. They can simply just say, here's the iceberg coming. Which way do we want to handle it? Big companies couldn't do that. And you saw how it reflected in their branding. They were responding to a moment in time. That was it. They didn't know what else to say.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I saw even in the big businesses, when I say big businesses, I'm not talking about mom and pop versus Coca-Cola. I'm talking about ones that are kind of in the mid-range. And the bigger businesses, they all panicked. And what I came up with last year was a term. It said, "Don't panic, pivot." It's figure out how to pivot. Well, they all were pivoting. Yeah. All of their employees no longer could come into the office. I mean, some of my customers turned in IT managers, instead of business owners. And they're trying to figure out how to get everybody working from home and interchange and get them on their networks and all that kind of fun stuff. But the one thing that happened is there were two different groups. There was a group that said, okay, everybody else is, doing the same thing we are. So we're just going to cut out everything. We're not going to advertise. We're not going to market. We're not going to do anything. It's not going to do any good. Nobody's going to buy. Right.
Scale way back.
The other ones that said, we want to create awareness. We're here, we're working, we're doing things. And what I saw was the ones that did this were the ones that went like this. They're the ones that actually exceeded expectations last year. The ones that scaled back were the ones that are still trying to figure out how to get back on track this year. Would you agree?
100%. And I am one of those people who had to pivot. I shifted my business considerably because it was about workshops in office. And on March 13th or March 12th, whatever that day was, all of a sudden that was no longer an option. And I had to look for, okay, what's going to make the most sense and adapt and shift, just like a lot of businesses did. But the challenge with that, if you think about what a pivot is in terms of basketball, it's moving around an axis point, right?
Right. But it's keeping your foot planted. That's the biggest thing.
Exactly. But a lot of businesses kept their foot planted and are going in a circle. They were playing it out based on, okay, what kind of messaging is going to make us look good through this? And what do we say to our employees? And what do we say to our customers through our marketing or our communications, internal or external? And the ones that were still trying to figure out what to do are basically pivoting back to 360 degrees where they started.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that had the money to, I'm going to pivot, they could pivot in a bunch of different directions that managed their time and their money in that moment. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, they're okay, we're right back to where we wanted to be. I think the ones that truly pivoted and went a new direction or opened up opportunities for themselves are the ones that pivoted and landed in the right direction and made the pass in the right direction, to stick with the basketball parlance. They didn't go in a full circle. They said, we're going to move this way. And in my point of view, from what I've seen over the past year and a few months, the bigger businesses did the 360. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't necessarily capitalize on something new. It wasn't a new insight that came out. Maybe it was from a marketing communication standpoint, but that was about it. It was weathering the storm. For smaller, more nimble businesses, they uncovered opportunity. Go back to that idea of curbside delivery versus
Mm-hmm.
the curbside pickup versus delivery. That's an opportunity that company never thought about, that business never thought about before. And this made them think about it, but they took advantage of it in the right way. They didn't start spending against it and saying, we have to get more drivers and get to everybody. They said, we're going to leverage the point that now people are coming to us, and we're going to make it as easy for them and safe for them as possible. That's thinking about your customer.
Mm-hmm.
Verizon or Coca-Cola telling me, we're here, we understand, and we're here for you, makes no sense to me whatsoever. None.
Right.
It's a PR move.
Yeah, and the whole point that you brought up about, don't panic, pivot is, pivoting that 360, but the whole point is at that point, the minute you decide to pivot, you have to pass the ball. Otherwise, it's
Yep.
traveling, and it's a
Yep.
foul. So that's one of the things I think that everybody did. Like you said, they circled, but they didn't realize until we pass the ball, everything we're doing isn't going to work. And they had to
Right.
advance it. They had to figure out a way to advance it. So back to again, defining that brand. And I think the pandemic, it's something I call, and again, building on what we're saying, now we're in a post-pandemic pivot. We had
Mm-hmm.
PPP last year, which was money that kept us alive. Now we got PPP, which is now we've got to define what our business is in this new economy because things have changed. I mean, there's so many different things that
Yep.
changed. I listened to how many people before the beginning of last year or, beginning of 2020 were doing mobile banking, online banking? That's something new that came up that all of a sudden you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't go to a bank and you had to do everything on your phone. Well, guess what? Now people are doing that and they're discovering, wow, mobile cash. This is pretty cool. I take my cell phone out, I go to an ATM, I, basically take a picture of a QR code and it spits out money. It's a completely different way of doing things. But there's the opposite side of the coin. And the opposite side of that coin is people are craving human interaction. So they're wanting to get out there and meet
Mm-hmm.
people where they're at. So, some companies are focusing overly on technology where they're missing the boat on that human to human relationship. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think just to level set with the Amazon and the customer ratings and reviews example, that fundamentally gave consumers an advantage. And really, the brands we're looking at externally, they were losing control of the message. Okay. But
Mm-hmm.
turn that internally. Even the most basic idea of a 40-hour work week has been completely demolished. The idea of going into an office 8 hours a day, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody in the world found out they could do their job, for better or for worse, remotely.
Right.
So the idea of investing in technology, for instance, that's not going to change. There's no way that businesses, I know recently Morgan Stanley and the CEO of Morgan Stanley said, everybody's coming back full time. This is the way this business is run. Well, it wasn't for a year and a half. And
Mm-hmm.
you still made money and you still did fine and your employees still did their jobs.
Right.
So for a company or a brand to say you have to go back to normal when we've had a year and a half of not normal and saw what we're capable of, why would I say, okay, I'm going to go back full time if I could just say, you know what? I like the flexibility of working remotely. I could find a job anywhere because the smart companies are the ones that did invest in technology and are going to maintain this. Think about the back end of it and how much money a company that has 6 floors in Manhattan can save if they only need 3. That's a
Right.
business decision. That's not everybody has to be in the office for productivity's sake. You just found out you can pay half of your lease a year and still get the same productivity out of your employees. Why would you not embrace that and look for how to nurture that as opposed to say, all right, we're going back to normal? And that's a big brand way of thinking. Nobody
Right.
needs to be. I sit in my basement and I talk to people from around the world from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Why would I need to start going back to regional meetings that I can only get to if they're in Boston, Providence, or maybe New York? It doesn't make sense for me at all as a business. And even little things like you mentioned QR code. Restaurants are getting rid of menus and just putting a QR code on their tables. And you scan the QR code and it opens the menu. That wasn't happening with regularity before COVID. And now
Right.
it is, but they're not going to stop doing it. It's a great convenience and efficiency. So I think a lot of opportunities will come out of it for businesses to see how they can be more efficient. But the ones you try to go back to before COVID are missing the point of what came out of it.
And to build on what you're saying too, I think that, we've heard about, I think pre-pandemic, we talked about the gig economy, where people were looking for gigs. They'd go to this gig, they'd go to this gig, they'd go to this gig. In other words, and one of the things too, when you're talking about employees, is that there's so much going on in this realm. We go down so many different rabbit holes, but the key thing is that, employees, millennials don't have the same mindset that boomers do. Millennials don't care about possessions as much as boomers do. We were taught as young kids, at least I was, you get a job, you buy a house, you get a car, you get a gold watch, you retire, you put money into, some kind of retirement. Back then you get a pension. Now you had to do your own 401k, and all of that is completely out the window even now. So we've gone from, the millennials, like my kids who are in their 30s, they'll never own a house. They don't want to own a house. And I don't blame them. I mean, my house here is 20 years old. I got to put, $30,000 in windows because all the windows are rotted out. They don't have to do that. They don't have to come up with that extra money. I'm paying the same amount every single month for a huge house. We don't need all the spaces. My daughter's paying in downtown Chicago. But guess what? She has no maintenance costs. So she can take that money that she would have to put into that and go on a trip. She can go, she can live a lifestyle. So their lifestyle economy is different. So now getting back to that point, we used to be in a gig economy. Now I think we're in something called the creator economy. And I've heard that term a couple of different times. So what the creator economy is that you can take what you're good at and basically market that as a brand. And sell that one thing to multiple people instead of going to work for one company. And actually, number one, you can control your own destiny. You can do better, and you can offer a service that all these companies are looking for. So I think companies are going to start embracing that as well. What's your thought on that concept?
I think you're spot on. I think that the idea of a creator economy makes sense to me. Absolutely. I think what we're seeing is more of it's an on-demand economy, meaning things move so quickly that opportunities arise very quickly. So think about how long TV took to propagate, or radio, and then TV, and then computers and the internet and cell phones. Like, we've got the power of the entire Apollo 13 launch support control room in the palm of our hands in the form of a phone now. That wasn't a baby boomer thing that they could ever relate to. That was sci-fi shit. That wasn't something that would even come to mind. The idea of a communicator is something they saw on Star Trek, a handheld communicator. You know what I mean? So their perspective of the world, there you go, exactly. Their perspective of, look what I'm talking into. This is ridiculous. So their perspective of the world is completely different than what the perspective of the world is today. But the perspective of the world today is that I can talk to anyone around the world, and it doesn't take me any more time than clicking a button on a computer. And that used to be writing a letter or spending $17 for a 5-minute phone call. So you can't really compare. There's no basis for comparison between the two because it's apples to dump trucks in a lot of ways. It's not apples to apples. So I think what we're seeing is the old guard coming to terms with the fact that they can't do anything about it, and the new guard, the millennial workforce, is defining what that workforce looks like. So let's take an example of what's called exoburbs. These are areas that may have been somewhat industrial or just sort of functional in their purpose, but not really drawing a domestic crowd, meaning it's not a traditional suburb, it's not an urban
Mm-hmm.
setting, it's not rural. Let's take Frisco, Texas is a good example of this. Frisco, Texas is located 15 minutes out of downtown Dallas, and it was basically industrial or some shopping plazas and stuff, but it was just there.
Mm-hmm.
Now that people can work from anywhere, this millennial army of exoburb developers, if you want to call them that, turned Frisco, Texas into this unbelievable place with restaurants and shopping and neighborhoods because they weren't tied to industry. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
just have to have a job in Dallas. They didn't have to be tied to what was going on in Frisco. They were able to take this low cost town and turn it into a suburban paradise that wouldn't have been there otherwise if it weren't
Mm-hmm.
for their ability to work remotely, define what that market was going to look like, and define what their living situation looked like, the conveniences of it. It's almost like a city adapting to the people that moved there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what they were able to force because they weren't anchored to a geographic location for work. So
Right.
I see that power of defining what the workforce looks like as being on the shoulders of that 30 something generation. And guess what? When I'm 75 and whatever they're calling the old Gen Xers at that point, I'm going to be marveling at whatever the 30-year-olds are doing then. And it's going to be, in my day, that wasn't possible.
Right.
So it's just a big cycle.
Yeah. Well, and so, again, getting back to what the brand is, how do companies, and again, it depends on services. It depends on, whether you're selling a product, a service, those kind of things. But how do companies amplify this in a way? And one of the things I wrote an article this week about, if you want, a lot of companies, and I saw this when I went to one of my first networking meetings. It was actually with a Technology Manufacturers Association. It was one of their committees. And I was
Mhm.
on the committee, and almost to the person, everybody was saying, we're having a hard time getting talent. They're losing people, and they're having a hard time getting talent. And one of the things I said as part of the brand, and what I said in this article was, if you want to attract good people, you're going to have to market your business and your culture as hard as you market your products. What do you
Mhm.
think?
And well, I think generally the idea of how do we treat our people, or how do we take care of our people, is something that in a big business scenario is an HR function, and unfortunately falls in the category of we have to do it looking at the big entity that is our people. And what employees are looking for now is me, the individual, because now I know it matters. It's
Mm-hmm.
not about going to a cube farm. It's about the work that I was able to turn out from my bedroom is important to that company. And it starts to give people a new perspective on what they're doing. It's not about, oh, the manager's coming and walking by at 8 a.m. Am I at my desk? I used to work for a guy like that and it drove me nuts. But I
Mm-hmm.
would still show up at 8:15 because I was making sure that I didn't fall into the trap of I'm not here to be checked on like that. I'm in my 40s. I'm not a child. I'm here to do my work to the best of my ability and make a paycheck for doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's inherently this freedom that was given to employees to see themselves as important, not just a cog in the wheel, but what that cog is meant to do and why it's important to that wheel, simply by being removed from the corporate culture or the office culture that was created, where it's a
Mm-hmm.
40-hour work week and the people who stay 45 hours are looked at as stronger or whatever. I think the individual really comes out as being the key identifier, and how you treat the individual is going to attract them. And it's about their flexibility now. It's about what they want. It's truly about, that's your audience if you're a business.
Mm-hmm.
What your audience wants is what they've experienced for a year and a half. Are there some who crave that need to be in front of people? Of course. And they want to be back on the road if they're salespeople and shaking hands and doing what they know how to do. But there is no steadfast rule that says somebody can't do their job over a 5-day period by being only in the office 3 days a week for a floating desk and meetings or to
Mm-hmm.
check on things. Like that can still happen. And that's the reality that everyone was shown. So if big businesses are looking at it as we're going right back to how it was, if big brands are doing that, they're missing the absolute shift that happened. And I say absolute because look at Apple. Apple already announced that they are going back to work 3 days a week. Everybody's in on those 3 days a week. And the
Mm-hmm.
other two, everybody works from home. They've already made that decision. And that's a huge sea change in the world's one of the biggest company. I mean, those are the types of things that are happening to every company. And I
Mm-hmm.
think small business has an advantage. They have the ability to be nimble. They're already set up like this in a lot of cases.
Right.
Small businesses are not necessarily working in an office, but they are collaborating with people all the time and they're
Right.
meeting less often with people. Capitalize on the nimbleness of that and think about what a nimble brand can do versus one that's based on just do it. How would
Mm-hmm.
Nike shift everything from just do it if they had to shift their brand? They couldn't.
Right.
But a small business, they can move pretty quick to do that and adapt to the times, and that's what they got to do.
Well, and things like Nike too. I mean, when you think about a big company like Nike, you think manufacturing because obviously they produce products. Well, let's face it, the vast majority of their products are coming over in containers. They're not building them here, so it's not like you're managing factories. Nope. You're managing distribution channels, sales channels, those kind of things. Those people don't necessarily physically have to be in an office. And I think it was Iceland. There was a study that they talked about the efficiency of the 4-hour work week and just how much more productive people were working 4 days a week versus 5 days a week. And so, what Apple is doing, go ahead.
You said the 4-hour work week. You said the 4-hour work week. And I was like, oh my God, they're brilliant.
Yeah.
4-day work week. Okay, I'm back on track.
Right, 4-day. Yeah, sorry, I was conflicting hours and days, but I mean the key thing is that there's 4 days a week. Apple 3 days a week. It's not what the difference there is. In Iceland, they're only working 4 days a week. Apple has gone a little bit hybrid and saying, okay, we're going to work 3 days in person and 2 days off. In your own office. So they're still working 5 days, but now they're showing that if people are more focused and can work from home and get more done, think of all the money this saves an average person, right? I mean, clothes, cars, commuting, time, just the time going, for me to go to Chicago on any given morning is an hour and a half commute minimum. That's if traffic is good. It could be 2.5 hours. I could spend 4 to 5 hours in the car getting back and forth, or even on a train. It still takes me a half hour to get on the train, an hour to get down, an hour to get back. It's still 3 to 4 hours, getting ready, going there. So there's 4 hours of your day that could be spent in front of a computer, just to get somebody physically in an office so you can watch over them. Right. I mean, so I think that small businesses, that nimbleness is so incredibly important. Now, here's the other nimbleness too, in this just in time economy. This is the way I built my business, and this is what I've worked on for the last 5 years, is bringing in the talent that needs to fit the project, as opposed to hiring all these people and then trying to find work for them. You know what I mean? So in other words, if we need
overhead, taking on overhead and payroll.
Right. Yep. So all of that. So the bottom line is I can bring people in and take them out, and bring them in and take them out as the gigs come. And as the culture is there, and as and they're very creative, and they're very, very, very good at what they do. And here's the other thing, because all they're doing is that one job. They're not filling out reports. They're not going to meetings. They're not doing all this other stuff. They are more efficient at it, saving my customers money and giving them a higher quality product. Because I don't have to go to India to get things for $5 an hour. I'm paying people way above $15 an hour, and they're making more money, and my customers are actually saving money in the long run if they even tried to do that internally or work with a bigger company. You know what I mean? So it's a win-win for the people doing the work. It's a win for the companies who are getting better products at lower prices with higher quality. Right?
I'm a case study of this, Brian. I pivoted
Mm-hmm.
through necessity. I had to, right? If I wanted to keep doing what I'm doing and showing businesses how to talk about themselves, I had to pivot. But here's the reality of it. I've gotten my process down. First of all, my pricing has gone through. I've been able to increase my pricing significantly over the past year,
Mm-hmm.
especially since January 1, because I see the demand for it. But more importantly, you use the word efficiency. I have my process down because what I do, they need to understand. They need what I do before they can start marketing what they're doing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They need to get that message right, because everything that comes after that is delivery of that message. I went from a 6-week process to a 3-week process because I could do everything virtually. I could turn from the first meeting to the final product delivery is 2.5 weeks for what I
Mm-hmm.
provide. I could not have done that without this, without the ability to work virtually and talk to people like this. It would be drawn out much more, and it would be reliant on these meetings that are set up that do take commuting time, gas money, all of those things that you just talked about. The reality is this: in 4 hours, I can do an entire project and meet with 4 people for half an hour. And
Mm-hmm.
my efficiency has grown exponentially, just off the charts, in how fast I could turn it around and how quickly we can meet and verify and validate and approve things, that it's revolutionized my business. And
Mm-hmm.
if I can deliver what I need to do for my client in under 3 weeks, they're getting a service that I couldn't provide at the beginning of COVID.
Right, exactly. So we had a comment from Mark Fitzgerald, and he said, brand is a combination of personality and logo. He's basically kind of amplifying what we were talking about before. And he says, small businesses know
Yep.
how to make their brand simple and focused to attract customers. Larger businesses have a harder time, basically, is what he's saying. And so I think, the reason that we're going down this rabbit hole is because brand really is about understanding how to position yourself against the competition, and what basically it's what you're saying is what makes this egg different than this egg, what makes this chocolate ice cream different than this chocolate ice cream.
Yep.
That's from a consumer standpoint, but from a business standpoint is is it creativity that you bring to the table? Is what we're talking about right now is how do you take what you just said and what I just said and turn it into a brand? How do you turn that into
Mm-hmm.
something that gets the message across to people that we offer something different in the services that we provide them?
Mark, that's a great observation and question or comment about this. I think I would replace the word logo with attitude, and that would be the only area that I would sort of differentiate from what you wrote. The reason is this: every brand has a personality and an attitude, and the personality should be something that never ever changes. Okay, because that we are who we are. We can't change who we are. A brand is the same way. You can't come out and one day be empathetic and one day be comedic and one day and say this is what we stand for, because you're just going to have a confused audience. So the logo aspect of that, what I call the brand attitude, is really what they project out about their personality that they want people to latch onto. So for instance, Nike's brand personality is that it's about achieving, it's about that drive, it's about reaching your goal, sure, but the way they manifest it is just do it. They start that the swoosh and the tagline becomes their attitudinal delivery of that message. If they came out of the door and said, hey everybody, just do it, it would be a totally different experience than just do it. This is about
Mm-hmm.
you. Don't wait, just do it. So the brand attitude is what's really the projection of that brand that your consumer is picking up on. It's not necessarily the personality. If Nike
Right.
all of a sudden decided that they're going to completely shift and go in a new direction, people would be confused by that because they've come to know Nike as exactly what it is, by their personality. They don't mess with their attitudinal projection that much. They don't screw with it. They make sure they stick to just do it. Don't put it on your bucket list. Just do it. This is all about you and achieving that individual goal. So now look at Under Armour. think about when they first started out, their advertising campaign was like a high school football team going to a game, and one kid's going, "This is our house." What if you just turned around to those kids on the bus, his teammates, and said, "Hey guys, we got to talk. This is our house. Imagine we need to protect this house." All of a sudden, you don't feel the same way about Under Armour. Their personality hasn't changed, it's their attitude. So that's what the logo and tagline represents from my point of view, my perspective, is the attitude of that business, and that attitude of that brand is what they're trying to project.
Mm-hmm. So how do we take that with what we do? How do we put an attitude based on the kind of services that you provide or I provide? And, you know, because there's a lot of people in the service business that have a hard time, you know, imagining what a brand is to them, because it's I think brand is much easier with products than it is with services. Would you agree?
I agree. I mean, I think the problem with brand is that none of the customers talk about brand. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
talk about it from a fashion standpoint, or they talk about it but they're not thinking about the brand of someone's SaaS business. They're not thinking about the brand, unless I'm totally reminding them of it constantly, of Verret and Associates. They're thinking about the functionality of it to them. That's
Right.
really where the audience starts. So thinking about how your brand is represented to your audience needs to start with them. And I'll give you an example. People are not watching TV to find out what they need next. They get an idea for what they need. They go onto a website, they go onto Google, and they search. That's what we do now. That's why SEO is so important for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But SEO goes as far as, okay, we want to make sure we show up, because let's say there's 4 results, 1, 2, 3, 4 that show up from a Google search. What's the consumer behavior in that moment? Click the first one. Does it resonate? No. Click the second one. They've wasted a second and a half of their time sorting options that used to be, I have to do all this research and figure out what the brand's trying to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Now they just say, no, that one doesn't connect. I'll just go to the next one. And they can go to the next page. There could be 50 results that they go through. So the easiest thing for a brand to do, search your service. Go to the first 4 websites. If they all say, for instance, an SaaS service or agency firm, "Hi, we're an SA," or a PR firm, "Hi, we're a PR firm, we'll get your word out." That's them just saying, okay, we need a website that says we're a PR firm. That has nothing to do with what their brand is. But if you go to someone who says, "You have absolutely no idea how to write a press release about yourself because you don't know how to talk about your own business, but guess what? We do. We'll show you how we do it. Just give us a call." Which one are you going to go to? Which brand in your consumer mind seems like the one that's going to help you in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is it should be an easy option, because I don't need you to tell me you're a PR agency if I'm searching Google for PR agencies. It's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of your time.
Right.
Just get to the point. Think about what's important to your consumer, and that's all your brand needs to represent. Your brand is an internal construct for, okay, we need a logo, or we need messaging, or we need a website. We need
Mm-hmm.
something that people will recognize, but that's it. People
Right.
look for the service they want. Can it be delivered the right way? And are they getting that message at the right time in the right order? That's it.
But back to the concept that you just mentioned, which is awesome. You know, companies tend to, when it comes to marketing in the B2B space, they tend to put a small percentage of their money into their own marketing. They'd rather purchase whatever it is they can. But one of the biggest things I see that businesses do is they cut corners. So they'll have, you know, somebody internally write the webpage copy. They'll have an IT guy make the website. And what they miss is they're wee-weeing all over themselves. We do this and we do this and we do this. You know, it's like they don't get the message of looking at it from the end user's perspective. So you really need to get an external set of eyes, an external opinion on what is going to resonate. And you need to test it and see what happens. You know, we have been in the marketing space. You bring up something that, you know, I agree with, but I also have questions about, and that is, yes, the first 4 things in Google do matter, That's if you're only looking at things that you don't know. But I think that once somebody knows about your business or sees it in a different place, sees it on social media, sees it on LinkedIn, gets an email, something like that, they're getting there directly. You don't need to compete against those other people. And so the key question is, does the
Nope.
message live up to, does the carpet match the drapes? Does the message match up to what your website says, right? It's being consistent with that image.
Your message shouldn't be any different from what your audience would experience on your website, what would come out of your mouth in a sales pitch, or what you would
Mm-hmm.
say to somebody on an elevator.
Right.
I never deviate from what I say I do, because that's not the point. Like, I need them to connect to the fabric of what I do, not
Mm-hmm.
all of these things I can provide. Then it becomes just, okay, do I need that? It looks like they have the service I want because it's listed here, but it forces confusion, and I mean, causes confusion and more of a cluttered message than anything else. If I can be known for doing one thing, that message shouldn't have to change based on the platform that I'm communicating it. It shouldn't have to change whether it's a small business or a big business. The services I provide to that business could be different, but at the end of the day, I want to be known for, I show businesses how to talk about themselves. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be known for all the services I provide. And I'm not going to waste my time trying to tell people all the services I provide, because I know I can get them to latch on to, oh, what do you mean how to talk about themselves? I run a business. Am I doing it wrong? Like, it starts to already paint the picture of what I do and how I help them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think small businesses really need to have that kind of focus. And that goes back to what we were talking about, even with acquisitions or partnerships. If you don't have that focus on that one thing, then those acquisitions and partnerships all look good. If you don't have that focus on that one thing, then you're being completely reactive to, oh, we need an influencer to sell a YouTube influencer to sell this, or we need to approach our SEO differently. You start to look at it, it's fragmented, just like the
Mm-hmm.
message not matching up on your website versus what you say in person. You run into the same sort of, I guess, set of challenges that you create for yourself. If you have
Right.
one thing you're saying, you could figure out the three places to say that and adjust it to make sure that those three places, the audience of those three locations, are connecting to it. Then you have a lot more focus. You have one thing that focus, one thing that they can stay on, that they never have to change. And that actually makes your entire marketing much easier. There's
Yes.
only so many ways you need to say one thing and so many places you need to put it. If you're saying five things, you got a lot of ground to cover.
Well, and going back, well, let me stop here for 1 second. Can you believe that we've been doing this for 52 minutes? That's how fast this goes. It's
Yep.
amazing. And because there's always so much great content that we could talk about. But going back to what we were saying, and I want to kind of get this last final point across. I think that business owners focus on the wrong metrics. They don't understand the concept of what it is they're trying to achieve. And a lot of it is what they're being sold and being told that they need. Like, for example, SEO companies, we can make you number one on Google. Okay, great. I'm number one on Google. I get a lot of clicks, but if my message isn't resonating, it's basically going to a dead space. I need to advertise on Facebook. I need to advertise on Yelp. Same thing. It gets back to that dead space. But I think you've got to dig even deeper than that. And the reason I say that is I have a degree in electronics and I've learned how to troubleshoot. And troubleshooting means if you're not getting sound out of a speaker, you have to go from the speaker back to the source rather than from the source to the speaker in order to make it work. So the end result, you always start with the end result. And the end result is I want to sell a product, or I want to have a conversation with somebody about selling a product. So what does that conversation look like? And then start working backwards. How did the conversation, originate? Did it originate on LinkedIn? Did it originate on my website? Them filling out a form, downloading an ebook, whatever it is. And then from there, okay, how did they get to the website? And then when they, is the content that's driving them to the website working to get people to that conversation mode? So you've always got to work yourself back into what you're doing, as opposed to saying, if I only do Instagram ads, I'm going to be rich, right? I mean, that's basically it.
100%. And you were actually using the terminology that is one of the first things I point out to clients when I'm working with them is, I gotta be on Facebook. I gotta be on Instagram. I gotta advertise here. That's all stuff that other people are telling you should be doing or that you've seen other companies do. That doesn't mean it's right for your company.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look at it with a critical eye and say, all right, even if Facebook advertising is the right thing to do, what am I saying there? And if it's going to differ from what I'm saying on Instagram or my website, then I'm doing it wrong and I'm wasting my money. It's just putting a bunch of messages out there and it's kind of scattershot. But if you go out with one thing that you need to communicate and you figure out that Facebook advertising allows for the lowest investment to hit the highest level of my audience, and here's the message that, my message can get through the exact same way there, then it becomes something that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I listened to everything everybody was telling me to do. I had to be on TikTok, or I had to have my own podcast, or I had to be doing this or that. I had to be dropping off folders with my picture in it at businesses. And finally, I said, why the hell am I doing everything that everybody else is telling me to do? And it's just because I feel like, oh, well, that's where my audience is, so I should be doing that because somebody else told me that's where they are. When I finally took a step back and realized I was throwing away time and money by trying all of these different things, what it came down to was I need to be on LinkedIn because that's where other businesses are, not on Facebook or Instagram. For my business, LinkedIn is where I need to be for content and communication. I need to talk to people one-to-one about what I do, and networking is the way that I do it, because I know I can hold a conversation for half an hour with someone and I can provide value to them in that half an hour, and that's valuable for connection. And then
Mm-hmm.
finally, I don't want to host my own program. I'll suck at it. I won't stick with it and I'll mess it up. You blow my mind, the fact that you could do this, but it's not me. It's not who I am. But I make a great guest because I won't shut up. And people are perfectly happy to have somebody who talks a lot on their podcast, especially if I can make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I make sure that I'm a guest and not a host. That's
Mm-hmm.
three things that I looked at that I do continuously, routinely every week. And it's what drives my business forward. I
Right.
would say the same thing for any business. Take a step back and say, how many of these things are you doing because you feel like that's where your audience is, or somebody told you to do it? Take a step back and say, what is the one thing I'm trying to communicate? And where are the three best places that I'm going to get the highest return on investment to do that? And the answers might surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
The answers may not be throw money into an advertising campaign. The answers may be go to a convention and spend $200 to set up a table and meet 10 people. That would drive more of your business than meeting 1,000 people through Instagram. So
Right.
it's about that quality of interaction and what's going to create that connective fabric. It's about directing your message with them perfectly so that they're getting it in the order that somebody would want to understand it. Any
Mm-hmm.
consumer, how they process information, and then finally making sure that you are projecting that message to them in the right terms and the way that they can agree with, that they can
Right.
latch on to. So as long as you stay focused with those things, and all of a sudden marketing, like I said, vessels that carry your message across the water, becomes a lot easier to identify and stick with. But until you have that one thing you want to say, it's very, very difficult to maintain that kind of focus. And that's what I've seen in my own business and with countless other businesses, whether I'm just meeting them or working with them. I see the same kind of relation. It's hard when it's your business.
Right.
Incredibly hard to talk about yourself when it's your business. And that's the number one thing that all of my clients have in common, or all
Mm-hmm.
businesses have in common.
Yeah, there's a couple of final points, and I want to give you an opportunity to give your connection info. But point number one is a lot of businesses treat it like this. No disrespect to deaf people, but a lot of people say, you know what, I'm really good at speaking. I know I could do audiobooks, so I want to go find a niche that is underserved. So I'm going to do audiobooks for the deaf. It's like, why? The next one
Yeah.
is that there's the owner of ServiceMaster used to, and ServiceMaster is a cleaning company at the time, would actually go into hospitals, don janitorial equipment, and go work as a janitor to see what his brand felt like to the people that they were serving. Meaning that you have to get your foot in the door and do what you should do in order to understand the journey and the experience that your customers have. It's just like anything else. You should go on your own website and buy your own products and see what this customer service is like. You just should know that.
Mhm.
So I think brand covers so much base, and we've done a great job today. And I think people are going to want to learn more. So tell people how they can get a hold of you, and we're going to finish this up today.
You can get a hold of me simply by visiting my website, www.verretandassociates.com, A-N-D, or by looking up Mike Verret on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And my offer, what I sell, is free 30-minute phone calls. I just love talking to people about their business. I'm not worried about the outcome. If I could help people on a free call, I do. And I promise not to be boring. That's my only brand promise. Nobody looks at I actually do a remarkably good job of making sure people see I can't say my butterfly there, or you always see in my chair. Like, I try to have that sort of identification, but that's how I treat brand. Otherwise, it's about my audience and their business. So I am more than happy to, I love meeting new people, hearing about their business challenges. And more often than not, I can give them some advice and guidance on a complimentary, is that the way to do it? Complimentary 30-minute phone call. So
awesome.
That's how to do it.
Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to hit us out with the theme music, and everybody have a great one. We'll see you next week with another great guest. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.